Right, good evening everybody. Welcome to Cheltenham Borough Council's Licensing Subcommittee for Alcohol and Gambling, which is being held today, which is Wednesday the 5th of July 2023. My name is Councillor Dr David Willingham and I have been elected to chair the committee today. The meeting is being streamed live to YouTube and being recorded for training purposes. If there are any breaks in the transmission to the YouTube stream, then the meeting will be adjourned for a short period until any issues are resolved. The meeting will be retained on the Council's YouTube channel for 4 years. Bit of housekeeping, a fire alarm is not planned, but if the fire alarm does sound, please leave via the nearest exits, which are the doors that you came into with the green sign above it, or there's a door there as well. If you have a mobile phone or anything else, any electronic equipment that makes loud pings, if you are able to put it on silent so it doesn't disrupt the meeting, that would be much appreciated. I'll now start, well, if we explain who we are. So, as I said, I'm Councillor David Willingham. I'm a councillor for St Peter's. Up here, I've also got on my right, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Jason Kirkwood, I'm the team leader in licensing.
And then on my left.
I'll take myself in. Vicky Fennell, the legal advisor.
Have you got? We've got our 2 democracy officers who are here to take the minutes, and then my 2 council colleagues, so Ed and Tim, if you want to go first, Ed.
Yeah, Ed Shidley, councillor for Basildon Ward.
Councillor Tim Harman for Park Ward.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'll now move on to the formal part of the agenda. So, as I've said, I've been elected and I've got to go through apologies for absence. Obviously, there are 3 of us, so there are no apologies. Agenda item number 2 is declarations of interest, and I made site visits with the licensing team leader today to both sites. That's for agenda item 3 and for agenda item 4. I also cycled past both of the exteriors at some other point between the agenda being published and today. With that, we'll move on to the first substantive item, which is agenda item number 3, which is the determination for a premises licence at 8 Imperial Square. So because this is a regulatory item, members must be present and have heard the proceedings in their entirety to vote on this item. So we will ensure that the applicant, the applicant's representative, are present in the meeting. We will also ensure that any objectors are present. I will ask the licensing officer to introduce the report. Members will get an opportunity to ask the licensing officer any questions as a result of that introduction. The applicant and their representative will get an opportunity to ask the licensing officer any questions as a result, and as will objectors if they have any questions. Objectors will be given the opportunity to speak, and we will ask you to limit this to no more than 10 minutes if you can. If you need more than 10 minutes, then we will look at that at the time as we get there. The applicant and their representative will also then be given the opportunity to make their case, and between both of those, members will get the opportunity to ask questions. There isn't any cross-examination, and if there are questions from one party to the other, we will take those through the chair. We can go around that a number of times if there are things that need to be clarified. The applicant will always get the final right of reply. In order to go and look for the decision, we may well adjourn with our legal officer to take advice. And since there are more people in the chamber than there are, we will leave to do that. It's just for us to take legal advice. And then we will come back and hopefully provide you verbally with our decision, and if not, that will come in writing later. And you will get your written decision notice within the statutory timescales. So I would now like to ask the licensing officer to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Licensing Act 2003 introduced a unified system of regulation of various premises, and one of those controls is through a premises licence, which is the subject of the application today. The licensable activity under the Licensing Act 2003 includes the sale of alcohol, regulated entertainment, late night refreshment, and was introduced in 2005. Since that time, the government has produced statutory guidance from time to time. That statutory guidance the council is bound by that guidance. It must follow that guidance unless it has reasons to depart from it. If it does depart from that guidance, then it needs to give clear reasons why. The Act also brought in the requirement for each council to produce a statement of licensing policy. Each council could produce its, based upon controls in the statutory guidance, it could bring in its own policy in regard to how it administers and enforces under the Licensing Act 2003. Extracts of those documents were attached to the report, and they are available on our website. The guidance and the policy are both referenced through the report. The system, the crucial point about the Licensing Act 2003 is it's built upon the consideration of 4 licensing objectives. Those licensing objectives are effectively the foundations on which the legislation is built, and they are the key considerations when an application is considered. They are the prevention of crime disorder, public safety, prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. Each objective is of equal importance. The default position on an application is that effectively it's granted unless there are reasons to not grant it. And that's why we're here this evening, to consider the objections that have been made. The process is built upon the idea that there are responsible authorities, and those are the statutory bodies such as the police, fire service, environmental health, that are the key statutory consultees effectively under the legislation, and that what are called now other persons also have an equal voice in terms of being able to make representations where they might be a resident or a local business or a representative thereof. In terms of policy considerations, the council within its statement of licensing policy does discuss the idea of core hours for licensable activities, and it defines a more centralised area as potentially having the ability to open till a later hour, and beyond that area, the terminal hour is suggested as being slightly less. The location for this application is defined as a town centre area, but obviously there are lots of nuances to this idea of the core hours. It's not simply a black and white. If you're in the zone, you get these hours, and if you're outside the zone, you get these hours. There are far more nuances to the process, and each application must be considered on its merits, regardless of that particular aspect of the policy. It's there to guide members and parties to an application, but each application must be considered on its merits. That point, also within our policy, we have a number of issues that are considered where they're considered as relevant to an application. So if we've got objections that talk about certain issues, then certain things should be considered because our policy says that that's the case. So on page 3 of the 8 of the report, under 21, some of those things would include operating schedules, proximity to residential accommodation, the ability to demonstrate the systems in place to ensure timely dispersal of customers, and there's a few others in there as well. So those are the sorts of things that the council expects to see being addressed in an application. Where relevant representations have been received and mediation is not successful, then the licensing authority will hold a hearing to discuss the application, and that's obviously the situation we're in this case. There were attempts, I think, to mediate with the objectors, but that sometimes is difficult when there's a number of objectors to try and get together and to try and get an absolute consensus. So I'm not sure if that happened, or it was certainly considered, but it might not have come to fruition. responsible authorities and other persons may attend the hearing, and they obviously may amplify and clarify the points that they've made, and the applicant is also able to attend and present their case. The application is attached to Appendix 1, and a plan was attached to the application, but for the reasons given in the report, we're happy for people to see that plan, but we don't share that online in the same way that we used to. During the representation period, the report says that there were no representations from responsible authorities. I have to correct that. Unfortunately, on the last day of the objections, I missed an email from one of my colleagues in the noise team, and I will explain at the end of my report their comments, just so that everyone's got the fullest picture on that. However, as we've all seen in the report, there are a number of representations from other persons, and they are as detailed, and they're attached to Appendix 3 to the report. Those that don't attend the committee are obviously given an equal hearing to those that do come along and amplify and clarify their points. So members will be considering all the representations tonight, regardless of whether those persons have attended or not. Just a couple of more points it's worth highlighting. Members are asked to consider this application and determine whether the controls put in place are sufficient to justify to mitigate any justified concerns. All parties should note that the Live Music Act allows live music to be provided between 8 a.m. and 11 p.m. in a premises that is licensed for the sale of alcohol for consumption on the premises. So the council, unless a review application is made down the line once a licence is in place, then the Live Music Act allows live and recorded music to be provided between those hours. That's beyond the control of Cheltenham Borough Council. The decision-making process is sometimes referred to as judicial in nature, but it is actually, in some references, it's described as an administrative process. And there are some comments from a particular case, Hope and Glory, where it's stated that, as Mr. Mathias rightly submitted, the licensing function of a licensing authority is an administrative function. By contrast, the function of a district judge is a judicial function. Licensing decisions often involve weighting a variety of competing considerations: the demand for licensed premises, the economic benefit to the proprietor and to the locality by drawing in visitors and stimulating the demand, the effect on law and order, the impact on lives, and a number of other points I mentioned. Sometimes a licensing decision may involve narrow decisions such as whether noise or noxious litter coming from the premises account to a public nuisance. They involve an evaluation of what is regarded as reasonably acceptable in the particular location. In any case, deciding what, if any, conditions should be attached to a licence. That's under point 39 of the report, and I think it's quite helpful in trying to put some context into how the licensing process works. Just to conclude, the subcommittee this evening will either grant the application with mandatory conditions only, and those offered in the application, grant the application with mandatory conditions, those offered in the application, and attach specific further conditions if they feel it's appropriate to promote the licensing objectives, or they may refuse the objection. And we've got a number of points that are made in the report about the use of conditions. I won't go through those, but they are there in some detail. As I said, I was going to just pick up a couple more points that I referred to there. In terms of the environmental protection or the noise team, their comments, they had dialogue with the applicant whilst the application was being made. In relation to the premises licence application for 8 Imperial Square, please see below the conditions that the Environmental Health are intending to submit. These conditions are a combination of those already proposed by the applicant, with the addition of one condition to ensure that access from the general public is controlled, so that this premises does not have hours to be functioning as a late night venue for non-members due to the close proximity of residential premises both within the same block and at the rear of the premises. The condition that's already in the application is that all windows and external doors shall be kept closed after 2100 hours, except for the immediate access and egress of persons, And the other condition that was agreed, as far as I'm aware, with the applicant was that each member of this private club shall be permitted to a maximum of 3 bona fide guests per visit. Okay, so environmental protection. In the report, I was under the impression that they hadn't made comments on the application at all, but they had. They obviously have had some discussions with the application, and on the basis of those conditions being attached, then they are satisfied that the application would not adversely affect the promotion of the licensing objectives. A couple of other points that have been made as well. There was a point in relation to the public notice. Some concern that the public notice maybe should have been displayed at the rear of the premises. The regulations which define what an applicant must do in relation to an application state that they don't reflect the front and the rear of the premises. They only refer to a premises in its entirety, as it were. The only occasion where an applicant will be required to put up more than one site notice is if the premises takes up a space of more than 50 metres square. Okay? If it takes up a space of more than 50 metres square, then every 50 metres where that premises abuts the highway, then a notice would need to be placed. And you can imagine with something like a festival, then that would see far more notices put in place. Also, we've just another point, just to save time later on, there are a number of comments from objectors about planning issues. It needs to be considered this evening that licensing and planning are very separate regimes. Cheltenham Borough Council has to ensure that it maintains that separation, and that in a licensing application scenario, we do not consider planning issues and vice versa, because if we do that, then the council could possibly act ultra vires, which means it acts beyond its powers, which means we are basically open to a slam dunk successful appeal. So we do have to be very cautious in terms of what we do and don't consider in terms of representations that are made. If they are planning issues, then the place for those to be considered is under the planning regime, and if they are related to the promotion of the licensing objectives, then they can be considered in this venue. Okay, so it's just worth bearing that in mind, and obviously the council is advised by a legal representative as well, so that provides some further assistance in that respect. That's my report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from my council colleagues? I'm not seeing any. Okay. Are there any questions to the licensing officer from the objectors? No. And are there any from the applicant? Okay. Right. And you've covered the things that I was going to ask, which was the explanation of the separation between planning and licensing. So what we'll now do is we will move on to hear from the objectors. So first of all, I would like to ask Heidi Binford if you would like to address the committee, please. We may well have some questions for you afterwards. And if you press the red button, then you'll get your opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. My husband and son were hoping to be here today, but unfortunately they have other commitments. My son's playing in the summer concert this evening, and so I am here representing all three of us. I'd like to start by stating my personal profound frustration that the applicant supplemented their application with a report from a purported acoustics expert last Friday, and we received it on Monday. We do not believe we've been given adequate time to properly examine it or evaluate the report. And as you know from reading everything that's been written in the submissions, public nuisance is a key issue in determining this application. According to section 9.37 of the statutory licensing guidance, when applications are amended at the last moment, the committee should at least consider postponing the hearing to allow all of us objectors to properly analyze it, and if we wished to get an expert to properly vet it and point out any technical issues that there may be with the report, we believe we should have been given the opportunity to do that. We believe that would have been in the public interest. but we're here now, so we'll get started, but I just wanted to put that on the record. The first thing I'd like to point out is the application relates to both activities inside and outside of the venue. Up until we received the most recent acoustics report, we weren't quite sure what outdoor space that related to, whether it was the back space that they had previously been seeking to serve refreshments, or their front parking area. I know that the planning process is separate, but it turned out when they were denied the opportunity to use that back space, and they withdrew their application because it became clear their application to change that wasn't going to go through, they quickly built a platform in the front car park. And I know it's not a planning issue, but there was no planning application or any effort made to get planning permission to build whatever you want to call it, a platform to serve alcohol and seating in the car park. That was just built this last month. And it was recognized in the acoustic report that that is where they're planning to do their outdoor alcohol and late night refreshment service. So I would like to address that first, if I can. The applicant is literally seeking a license to serve food and alcohol in our car park. I don't know of another place in Cheltenham where you're allowed to serve people and run a business in an active car park. They're seeking to do this from 10 a.m. to 2 a.m. in the morning. And while they, in their acoustic report, purport to want to limit that to 8 people from 10 p.m. on, there is no limitation whatsoever as to how many people can be in that space in the car park. And to get to the car park and get their drinks and food, you would have constant movement between 8 Imperial Square and this seating area, which also, it has seating along two sides of it, but there's a large area where it's intended for people to stand. It's not a seating dining area, not that that would make it any better, but it's intended to be where people come out, have cocktails, sit, chat, talk. And so you're going to have a constant flow from the building into the car park, past the one small lane that people have, because the car park goes one way. And so there's constantly traffic that will necessarily need to pass, either upon ingress or egress out of the car park, past the building and this drinking and food area that they want to set up in the car park. We know that one of the factors that must be considered in these applications is to ensure the safety of people visiting and working in the licensed premises. And we think that it's clear that walking and serving food in a covered park just is not going to be safe either for the patrons themselves or for those of us and other people visiting the myriad of businesses along that terrace during the day. They're mostly other types of day businesses like doctors and lawyers and planners and things like that. And so there are people going in and out of there all day. And so it's going to be a problem not only in the evening, but during the day. And we think it presents a real safety issue. It also, in addition to creating a safety issue, and again, there was never an evaluation, a proper evaluation to our knowledge. I guess some reports have come in, but as to the safety of doing that, or by any of the relevant authorities that I would assume look to see if you can conduct a business in a car park. We also would like to address the issue of the public nuisance and the noise. And this again, I think I'll focus mostly on the outdoor space first, and then I'll move on to the interior, because this, to us, we live in flat number 1 in Imperial Square, and even their own expert says we'll be the ones most impacted by the noise from this location. And while the report says that, and I want to get the right language, so let me pull it, I'm sorry. That there would be no discernible, sound from this activity kind of beggars belief. As you guys work in this area, you know that in the evenings, Imperial Square is actually quite quiet. There's occasional traffic that goes by, but that's kind of a dull noise in the background. It's nothing that's intrusive or causes you to lose sleep or interrupts your evenings with your family. What will wake you up and what is a nuisance to people living there are voices. And we do hear voices of people walking by. And so, for example, when the town hall has its events and people leave at about 10 o'clock, there is a short stint where people are leaving the venue and they then walk off and they go to their cars. But that's transitory and it's quick, and they haven't been drinking, and so they're not overly loud. But here, you're positioning people in a seating area to drink and be out for an evening having fun. And so it will cause a nuisance. And while I can't speak to the technicalities of the report, having lived there, I know that its conclusion factually is wrong. I know what I can hear with my windows closed and with my windows open. And in fact, when they were building that platform out front, it was during the day during the Science Festival. And so it was during the day when you had regular traffic noise and you had everything going on in Imperial Gardens. And we could hear their workers talking. And that was during the day. It was audible. And we could hear them. So to think that you're not going to be able to hear people laughing and having a good time drinking at 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock at night, it defies everybody's lived experience. And so that's one of the things I would just point out in connection with the report, which we can't address on a technical basis because we haven't been given the opportunity. But we do know from our lived experience of being there that voices carry, and having people seated in the car park right near our window is absolutely going to disturb our enjoyment of our property and our ability to sleep, and it's going to be every night. It's Monday through Sunday, and the Monday through Saturdays till 2 a.m. And on Sundays, they've kindly said that they'll do it until midnight. So we just wanted to highlight that. I would point out that the report also focuses on a lot of different criteria and standards and different things that I've never looked into, but I did look into the licensing policy and vision statement and the guidance that you guys determined, and there are a number that specifically talk about noise and outdoor cafes and tables and considerations that should be taken into, should be considered when deciding the application. And I just wanted to point those out because I think that they strongly and firmly show the policies of Cheltenham with respect to deciding these applications when there are residents like us nearby. Number one, it can be and is a public nuisance, even if it's a low-level nuisance affecting only a few people, and that's paragraph 3.21 of the Cheltenham policy. When it comes to outdoor tables and chairs, that's specifically addressed in paragraphs 3.26 and 3.29, and it acknowledges that tables and chairs in beer gardens can cause significant public nuisance to residents whose homes overlook these areas, and we do. Paragraph 3.26, where the authority receives relevant representations, the authority may prohibit the use of these areas in order to promote the public nuisance objective. With respect to pavement cafes and external areas, paragraph 6.54 says regard should be had to the need to ensure that the use of such areas will not cause nuisance to local residents and other premises in the vicinity. And again, when you talk about there being kind of some general standards that are considered but aren't necessary to each application, They do say that they normally restrict the use of external areas to 11 o'clock p.m., not 2 p.m., although we would argue that it shouldn't be at all. But if there is going to be anything, there's internal guidance that said it should be no later than 11 p.m. And with respect to the safety issue, I'd also point out that paragraph 6.55 says that premises that make use of external areas are expected to manage those areas in such a way as it does not impede access to the premises, obstruct the highway, and does not cause disturbance. And we think that all of those, everything about the current premises, outdoor premises, would violate those objectives. The points I would like to make with respect to the acoustic report itself, again, we would have appreciated the opportunity to hire an expert that could evaluate that for us and walk us through it and talk about the methodologies and some of the specific terminology in there. But just our cursory review, which we were able to do today, there were a number of things that popped up for us. Number one, the license seeks to play live music, and there was no testing whatsoever with respect to the impact of live music. There's no breakout assessment. It was limited to music through speakers, and so if you get a drum in there or a bass with its own amp, it's going to be a very different situation than that's being projected in the acoustic report. It also said that no measurements were taken along Imperial Lane, the facing facade on Imperial Lane, because there's no patron noise associated with the rear premises. But if you look at page 26 of their report, of their own report, the acoustic report, it shows there's a large room on the first floor at the back of the building with a sash window that is being used. And so while this room currently on their drawings is designated as a dining room, that doesn't mean that there can't be music, live or recorded, dancing, movies, or any other activities that would be significant and should have been considered. In addition, if you look at the drawings, there are 3 other rooms at the back of the building which don't include any designation and appears to have been omitted from the assessment, but I wonder why. These are part of the property, and you don't get a license for certain rooms in your building. You get a license for the property, and so whatever they're using them for now or they're claiming to plan to use, they're not getting a license for rooms, they're getting a license for the building, and so the entire back should have been properly assessed, and we think this is a fundamental flaw with respect to the report. Again, there was also no assessment. The assessment with respect to the outdoor seating area in the parking lot was limited to after 11 p.m. And there was no justification given for why they would only consider it to be a nuisance after 11 p.m. when they should have been seeing how it impacts our enjoyment of the property and whether it creates a nuisance before 11, because actually a lot of people go to bed before 11. But there was no consideration whatsoever for that, and so again, we think it's a fundamental flaw and just a glaring omission. In the report, it also assumes that there would be noise measures will be implemented. However, the applicant has not proposed any such conditions in its license. Moreover, the noise measures cited in the report include the installation of secondary glazed windows throughout the premises in order to achieve their conclusion. And yet we know, as a grade 2 star asterisk building, because it's in the conservation area, this would require planning approval. And so they may not be able to accomplish this. And if they don't, that's a necessary condition for the conclusion that the acoustic experts reaches in their report. And so they haven't gotten consent to do that. And so we don't know if they'd be able to do what they're planning to mitigate what otherwise may have been a very significant nuisance from sound generated from the premises. In our application, We mentioned a number of conditions that if you were inclined to grant the application, which we hope you're not, that there are additional conditions that we would like see added to the grant of any license. I don't want to repeat those since those are in our statement, but they are set forth in detail at the end of our objection in section 3 of our report. And one of the questions that maybe somebody can answer when they're speaking to this is everyone keeps referring to this as a club, membership. But nobody's mentioned what's involved in that or what relevance that has, the impact it's going to have on the neighbors. There are lots of things you can join off your app right before you walk in. Is there a process for these people? Is there something that makes it special and makes us less concerned about the noise these people will generate based on their membership? It's all been very kind of superficial and seems a bit like a straw man or some sort of shield that is kind of preventing any closer scrutiny of the activities and how boisterous these patrons will be or how loud they'll be. I don't know that it makes a difference that they're members, but if it does, why? And how is that going to be monitored by the council? Are there going to be audits to see if they're keeping proper records of only permitting these special people in and excluding the public? Because if it's the public that's being a concern, how are we going to make sure that they're not doing that? How do we monitor that? And I think that within licensing, it's very important to have limitations that can be enforced clearly and succinctly and that are transparent. So anyway, I thank you very much for your time and attention, and if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
If you can press that's it. Thank you. Members, do you have any questions? Okay. Just following from some of that, it might be worth just asking our licensing officer to explain the red line areas on the map or the plan for the licensable activity. That might just give you a bit of clarification, because I think the point about where the activities can take place probably needs a bit of clarification, but I'd rather someone qualified does that than me.
I think it might be best coming from the applicant, because obviously that was something that we did ask on the site visit today, and they wanted to confirm with the barrister to ensure that what was being said was clear. So the applicant will pick that up very clearly, I'm sure, when they speak.
Okay. If I now move on, so we've got the next objector, which is Mr. Martin Fell, to address the committee. But Mr. Fell has requested not to be seen on the broadcast, so I'm just going to let our Democratic Services make sure as best we can that doesn't happen, and then we'll hand across.
Okay, yep. Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm a local resident from Imperial Gate, the apartment block directly opposite the rear of 8 Imperial Square. I'd like to make a short statement to support the representations I've already made in writing. Those representations are on the record, and hopefully you've seen the detail of what I've submitted. We've raised several objections to the licensing application. These are largely around noise and disturbance, disorder and security. As I say, these objections are on the record, so I won't read them all out, on the assumption that the subcommittee members have read them in advance of the meeting. Our main concern is around noise and disruption from recorded and live music and from customers of the proposed private members club. So our apartment is about 10 metres away from the rear of number 8, so we are very, very close neighbours. Our lounge and bedroom windows on the first floor of Imperial Gate overlook the rear of the property. Music playing throughout the day, evening and up to 2 a.m. will undoubtedly be a significant disruption. It will be highly audible. To put this in context and to evidence it, we can hear the music clearly from the nightclubs Moo Moo and Pop World every night. These nightclubs are several hundred yards away. They're around 2 corners and are screened from us by buildings. And they have industrial level soundproofing. But despite all of that, we can still hear the music and at night need to shut all the rear windows in our apartment block to screen that music out. By contrast, number 8 is not several hundred yards away. It is directly opposite us, just across the road, across a narrow lane, 10 metres away. For me, it is inconceivable that nightclub-type music could be played during the evening and at night. We would hear it in our lounge and front bedroom very clearly. The applicant has proposed mitigating measures. These include closing the windows after 9 p.m. This will be ineffective, in my view. First, what about the noise up to 9 p.m? That will impact the best part of our evening. And secondly, number 8 has single glazed, old-fashioned sash windows, which will have little effect in blocking out sound. If we can hear the nightclubs which are further away, we will hear number 8 as well. An acoustic report on the impacts of playing recorded music was provided yesterday, or at least that's when I saw it. This report was commissioned by the applicant and has been submitted as supporting evidence. It has been provided very late in the process, leaving little time for consideration and discussion. It suggests that music may be played at levels that will allow guest conversation to take place. However, this will be very subjective from night to night, I suspect. Also, the acoustic testing that was carried out, such as it was, seemed to focus on noise impacts on 11 Imperial Square. Minimal testing appears to have been done for the impact on Imperial Gate. The report, furthermore, did not consider the acoustic impacts of live music, the cinema, nor the noise from customers within the building. These are further concerns which I do not believe have been addressed. In particular, the Sophie room at the rear of the property was highlighted as being particularly noisy. This room overlooks Imperial Lane and our bedroom. Music noise breakout was loudest in this room, if I've read the report correctly, and was audible at the majority of frequencies at Imperial Gate, unquote. Imperial Gate would hear this music and noise from the property. The report goes on to talk about further mitigations that may be put in place, such as potential noise limiting and double glazing. It is not clear how effective this would be, nor what the plans or conditions are for it. All my other considerations around evening and late night customer noise, traffic and so forth are in the briefing pack for the meeting. Suffice to say, Imperial Lane is already noisy at night due to customers from other venues using it as a shortcut, and we don't need any more. And finally, I would ask the members of the subcommittee to put yourself in our position and imagine that directly across the road from where you live, from where your home is, a club is being opened with an entertainment licence such as that proposed for number 8. Ask yourself in making your decision if you would be happy with the noise and disruption that this would bring to your home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions? No. Okay. Okay. What's that? Excuse me. So I would now like to ask Sarah Lefevre,
Yes, exactly.
who is the barrister for the applicant, to address the committee. And I suspect we will have some questions for you and your colleagues afterwards. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, my name's Sarah Lefevre and I represent the applicant today. Can I introduce the other persons who are here in case you do have questions and so that you can so direct your questions? I have sitting right next to me Ricardo Fearon, representative of the applicant itself. To his right sits Torben Anderson, who is one of the authors of the RBA acoustics report provided at the end of last week. To his far right sits a representative from my solicitor, Kerry McGovern, and behind us sits, at my far furthest away from me, Mr. Evan Harmon, who's one of the assistant managers at the premises. And then finally, Mr. Tim Fleer OBE, who is a resident who lives nearby, diagonally opposite the premises, who hasn't made a representation, but is in a unique category, I think, because he has attended and used the venue as a customer and can perhaps speak to that experience if you're so interested. I know, sir, and thank you for confirming that you have carried out site visits. I don't know whether your two colleagues managed to carry out the site visit with you or whether it was just yourself.
It was just myself, accompanied by the licensing officer to comply with our probity guidance.
Yes, thank you very much. I wasn't entirely sure who the attendants had been made up of. So speaking to a range of audience then, those who have attended the venue and those who haven't attended the venue, what everyone will know is the location of this beautiful building in the town centre, perhaps in the heart of the town centre, and importantly in the town centre as defined within your licensing policy for the purposes of core hours. The core hours for a venue such as these set to up to 3 a.m. That's not what we've applied for. So we're within that core hour policy. You'll know that the premises is located on a thoroughfare, a busy thoroughfare on any view through the heart of Cheltenham. And as I say, directly opposite that beautiful old town hall. Thus far, Mr. Fearon's been able to indicate to me that the investment in the premises, it stands at about £2 million. That's an approximate figure, but what it is a sign of is a real long-standing commitment to this venue and its success. You and your colleagues, sir, won't need reminding that if a premises sits in its community and behaves itself badly, then it will be susceptible to representations and might well be susceptible to review applications, which can result in everything up to the removal of a premises licence in its entirety. It is, on any view, a high-profile spot for a venue to sit in. It had its genesis really at the start of the pandemic, and it's been developed fluidly and has traded and operated as effectively a small private hotel. It's proven itself to be attractive to a potential membership, and so it is that the premises has been evolved and developed, seeking flexibility and a much wider use of the premises so as to provide, if this application is successful, a cinema area in the lower ground floor. Private dining rooms and lounge spaces on the upper ground floor and on the upper floors of the premises. Significant powder room spaces which can be used and deployed for treatments and for the wellness aspect of the proposed membership club. It is looking to create a venue which certainly to Cheltenham would be unique, an intimate home from home, a very luxurious, frankly, home-from-home space, which can be hired in some parts, some lounges made genuinely private, some private dining rooms being made genuinely private to their users for periods of time. It's an imaginative, beautiful building which is being highly tended for under its present ownership. So set over 4 floors, and in respect of the question about the plans, there are red lines marked on each of those 4 sets of plans. I don't know if it's helpful for me to talk through them, but I know that copies have been provided. What those red lines indicate on each of the 4 floors of the premises is the area that would, if the licence is granted, be the on part of the premises, the parts of the premises that would be entitled to provide licensable activities where they've been sought for provision on the premises, and that is all of the licensable activity that has been sought through this venue. Through this application rather, you'll see that there are on most floors some parts of the premises which don't fall within the red line. I can confirm, having carried out myself a site visit just before coming here, that those are areas that are effectively back of house. They wouldn't couldn't be used, couldn't be made usable for licensable activity. So it is very much bound by the red line as its provision. So far as the front area of the premise is concerned, which you, sir, have seen in its currently laid out seating arrangement, that is an area that falls within the curtilage of the premises. It is in fact populated, although to my eyes at any rate, although I appreciate this won't be a sentiment shared by all in this room, it is rather a beautiful external seating space with significant supports and sort of concealment of the area from passers-by, bound by planters and shrubs and so on. That is an area that's probably able to accommodate at most between 22 and 30 persons in that area, and that's what we can see at the separate area on the raised ground floor plan of the premises. There is no part of this application that touches on the rear area, the rear external areas of the premises. I have asked for confirmation in the course of my site visit and have been provided with it that there is no ingress or egress for patrons at the rear of the premises, saving only in emergency circumstances where, as you would expect, there is a fire exit to the rear of the premises. It's for that reason, and I'll ask Mr. Anderson to confirm this for himself shortly, but it's for that reason that patron noise has been assessed at the front of the premises, because that is the only area of the premises that the applicant seeks through this application to utilise. I hope that's a reasonable answer to the request for clarification. So far then as sort of numbers are concerned, if that helps, because quite often that gives the clearest sense of the scale of the premises. It is slightly unnerving talking to myself up on that enormous screen. I think I won't look up there again. The numbers would be, or on fire risk assessment, up to 225. That's the absolute ceiling that there could be in the premises. 225, yes, absolutely. That's not nightclub territory. This is not nightclub territory generally in terms of the premises, the possible layout. It is a townhouse. That's all it could ever be, and that's all its owners want it and intend it to be. So far as the members aspect is concerned, that's a really important aspect of the control over the operation of the venue. I appreciate a degree of cynicism around the membership, but it is well recognised in licensing circles that a premises that knows the name, because it is written down and recorded, of all those attending its venue and their guests, that it has a very high degree of control, both by way of control should something go wrong, and frankly deterrence. Any customer who was minded to behave themselves badly will know that they can be immediately picked up on, identified, enforced against, and their membership removed. I appreciate the concern about the apps that's been expressed. This is the world we live in, but at this premises, the route to membership will involve application and interview by the senior management staff in the premises. And so it is what it says on the tin, a very significant control as to the conduct of customers on the venue, and a very significant protection as to way in which these premises could operate. It's presumably, they're not here to speak for themselves, but it's presumably for that sort of reason that Environmental Health have asked expressly for a condition surrounding the membership and as to how many guests any member could sign in at any one time. But as I say, a recognised and very significant and high level of control where a premises operates for almost all of the time as a members club. I say almost all of the time because you and your colleagues will be well aware that we do seek to operate for the benefit of members of the public only during one of Cheltenham's fabulous festivals. There is only one point of ingress to the premises for membership and for entry to be secured, and that is through the front door, up 2 or 3 steps to the front door and in and along to the reception area where the signing in process will be completed. This is an application, and I'm very aware that I've spoken already, probably for pushing my 10 minutes, so I'll speed up. But I do need to deal with the way in which...
What I was going to say is, I think the objectors had more than the 10 minutes, so you will get an equal amount of time to make sure that there is equality and of representation.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. Well, the topic I was about to move on to was the way in which this application has been crafted and built through its operational structures and through its conditions. You have at pages 27 to 28 of your agenda papers the set of conditions that were and are proposed for your consideration. They draw heavily, you'll appreciate, on your model conditions. They include the condition about membership. They include the condition about closing windows and doors, saving for ingress, egress after 9 p.m. They also include the environmental health officer's proposal at the final condition at page 28. That's not a problem. It's not a problem because that's the way in which it was always intended this venue would operate. And you will, we've all just heard Mr. Kirkwood explain that if that condition and if these conditions were to appear on any licence you grant, they themselves have no concern about this application in respect of matters within their expertise, which of course is nuisance and public health generally. We've developed an operational management plan that, as with any licensed premises, will be a living document and a dispersal policy, which you have, again, within your papers. We did seek a series of temporary event notices to stress test ourselves. We operated successfully. There were no complaints brought, certainly to our attention, as to the operation of those temporary event notices. And all of this designed to build an evidence basis which we could then present to you for your consideration today. We have sought then expertise through the pre-application consultation process, which was extremely helpful, and thank you very much to the Council and its officers generally. That allowed us to shape and craft and have confidence and faith in this application. It is probably partly attributable to that consultation process that you do have silence from your responsible authorities. Silence from the responsible authorities. And they, as you and your colleagues will well know, are the repository of expertise generally as to matters falling within the licensing and the promotion of the licensing objectives. That's crime and disorder and public safety and nuisance in all its potential forms. And they have expressed no concern, subject to that slight gloss of the Environmental Health Officer. No doubt you'll be advised in due course about the significance and relevance of that absence of concern. And then the final piece of expertise that we have brought to you for your consideration within the timeframes permitted by this council is the report, the very expert report of RBA Acoustics, who were instructed on a fully independent basis and the independence is reflected throughout their observations in the report, to assess objectively, independently, what impact this premises, if this licence were granted to it, might have, and to propose control measures to address any issues that were identified. And what they did was assess music noise levels, and what they did was assess patron noise and people's noise. They applied their expertise to the premises and to the operation, and they reached their set of conclusions. Now, Mr. Henderson can well speak to him for himself as to any point of expertise that you might want to draw from him. But I would commend to you in particular at page 8 of his report, that's internal page 8, page 18 of our supplementary agenda, his conclusion, or the conclusions of RBA Acoustics. And in particular, some proposed controls that are set out in that conclusion. At the second bullet point, he says that noise associated with a maximum number of 8 patrons using the front external terrace along Imperial Square after 2200 hours will lead to no adverse noise impact to the worst affected residential receptors. From that, I hope you can take that it is not true that it's only after 11 o'clock in the evening that Mr. Anderson has been concerned with. What he has been concerned with is assessing when it is that that impact or the risk of the impact might bite, and proposing a control measure which is absolutely accepted by the premises, fit to manage and respond to that risk. What he says about music noise breakout is that the speakers are already subject, or he doesn't quite say this, the speakers, as a matter of fact, are subject to existing noise limiting controls. What he proposes is that a limiter setting exercise is carried out in collaboration with this council to make sure that those levels are set, because the music noise levels are capable of causing absolutely no outbreak, either from the premises to the outside of the premises or structurally within the premises. So that's his conclusion. What he says is if that can't be reached at an appropriate level, so that the premises want to play music more loudly, at that stage you'd have to consider secondary glazing. But what he says is that there are already systems in place at the levels that this premises wishes, in fact, to play music and to have entertainment that will cause a nil experience to the residents. That's a significant and very confident conclusion. But I'm just going to ask Mr. Anderson to speak briefly in the final moments that I have to deal with one or two of the points that have been raised expressly in the course of this hearing. It is said, Mr. Anderson, that your work didn't incorporate the possibility of the premises playing live music. What would you say about that?
I mean, that is correct. We didn't assess that level, but music breakout is music breakout, and I think where we take, once the noise limiter setting exercise is done and we determine the precise noise levels that are permissible inside, which don't give rise to noise breakout, we will then be able to understand what degree of live music would also be at that level, and it may well be that there is no live music possible, depending on the breakout levels. But that will be determined once we've done that limiter setting exercise.
Thank you. Next, the query about the assessment, or rather the non-assessment of patron noise at the rear of the premises. Is that right, and why didn't you so assess?
That is correct. The issue of patron noise is patrons in the external seating area and patrons dispersing, which all happen onto Imperial Square. We did consider music noise breakout onto Imperial Gate, and I must apologise, I've spotted a typo in our report at the head of page 4, which the title is Imperial Gate, but then it says 11 Imperial Square. Actually, that is the block of apartments on Imperial Gate. So we did assess music noise breakout to the rear from those, and my report incorrectly says that that's Imperial Square. So apologies for that, but we did look at music breakout to the rear and to the front.
Thank you. Sorry, the Sophie room in particular on the top floor of the premises is a particular concern according to your report. What would you say about that?
That room does have a powerful sound system in there, but it's a very high specification sound system that has the power, but is also designed around extremely high quality sound when played at low level. So it has the potential to be loud, but once the noise limiting exercise is completed, then it will just be providing very, very high quality sound at a low volume level to preclude noise breakout.
Of the noise limiter, have you do you know that it exists? Do you know that the system is there and operational?
It's my understanding that it is. It's an electronic system that controls these devices, and it's relatively common, yes.
Thank you. And then I think finally the cinema in the lower ground floor, what, if any, concern do you have about noise outbreak from the cinema area?
The concern that we've got from there is minimal because it doesn't back on to Imperial Gate where our main music noise breakout concerns occur. It fronts onto Imperial Square and it has better sound insulation from it.
Thank you. So I've trespassed on your patience already. That is the application. I'm sure you and others will have questions for us.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So yeah, we now move to members' questions. So do you have any questions for the applicant? Councillor Harman.
Yeah, thank you for that thorough presentation, but I think, and also the representation of the objectors. I do share the concern of the objectors on the acoustic report. A, because they received it quite late in the day and were probably not feeling confident and able in the time to assess it fully. I wouldn't for a moment impugn anybody's professionalism, but if I was an objector, I might feel that you are employed by the applicant. I understand from what Sarah said it was done independently. How can you reassure us that that is the case?
I haven't taken offence, so I think I would answer in three parts. Firstly, I wear both hats, so I regularly represent residents and I regularly represent applicants, and I will always take the same approach because I need to be honest, and it's if I get a poor reputation with councils, with authorities, then that spreads. The second part will be, although my assessment is submitted, and I understand it was relatively late for everybody, there is an environmental health officer who will be scrutinising my report and flagging up any inconsistencies. And the third part is, I don't do my job to my client by saying, you can do this, this and this, if as soon as he operates in the way that I've suggested, it causes the residents a disturbance and they bring a review hearing. So some of my recommendations are probably harsher than my client would like, but that's protecting him from future action from the residents.
A follow-on to that, it's probably more for the officer, so I might leave it till we come to questions later on, but it follows on from that point. Thank you.
Any questions?
I'm a little bit interested in the membership dynamic of this application. Could you sort of explain why you've gone for that sort of avenue of, having the membership there rather than just serving the general public? As you said, you've already, invested quite a great deal of money into this establishment. It would make sense, surely, that you'd want, as many people coming through it. So I'm really interested in how you will vet members and what's the characteristics of a member that you want inside Good Times? Thanks.
I think perhaps if I answer to start with and then turn to Mr. Fearon for the vetting processes, and he'll correct my answer, no doubt, if I'm wrong. This is a premises that has a limited capacity. The vision for the premises is that it be intimate, that people come because they know that they know and feel very comfortable in the space, that they have a sort of ownership over the space, and a membership system is a way of almost committing people, sort of signing a two-way contract as between those who use the premises and are sort of responsible in part through their own repeat attendance at the venue for shaping its dynamic and atmosphere and so on. There is that sort of dispensation around membership and their limited number of guests, so there is a sort of relaxation and hopefully a spread of word of mouth through other potential members. But this is a venue that would always be limited strictly by the numbers that you could have in it, safely have in it. And so it's really getting that. It's so dependent on the atmosphere generated by the customers that having a system, a sort of exclusivity tag, as it were, attached to it, but having a system whereby the premises it effectively vets and decides who it is that it wants to have in its venue so as to shape it is a successful business model and not something that shuts itself off from vast numbers of drop-ins from the street. But Mr. Fearon, if I've got anything wrong, correct me, and do explain about the vetting processes and what you'd be looking for in a member.
Yes, absolutely. So, with regards to the vetting, we have a carefully curated committee. This committee consists of, successful individuals in various fields. We are art-centric, so the club is about contemporary art and culture. And so the various committee members propose founding members that can help shape the club and let's say the experiences that it can offer its members. As I said, we are art-centric, and that would be the purpose of the membership angle, and how we'd like to build a community around contemporary art and culture, and then try to tie in with the existing festivals, with the town, etc., so that we could, promote those types of experiences and activities. Yes.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for that answer. I understand now that what you're going for is obviously having an exclusive membership art club where you get like-minded professionals coming together. And that makes sense to me. But then I find it interesting that you're going for, a place where you'll host guests during the festivals. Is that also something you're going for? Because surely if you were going for people who are coming to Cheltenham, they might not be members. So...
Yes, exactly. And there is that carve-out in the application where we do seek for members of the public to be able to use the premises during the festivals. I mean, you want to speak to that? Of course.
So, with regards to the festivals, what we want to do is work with the festivals that, let's say, generate a lot of interest in the town already. But it is an invite-only or pre-book only scenario. It's not to say that people will be able to just walk in off the street and, and us not know about them. So the idea is that you don't have to be a member, but you will become a temporary member through another, let's say, member of the committee or founding member that would essentially invite you to the event whilst the festivals are in play. I hope that makes a bit more sense with regards to.
Yeah, no, that makes sense for now. I think that's everything from me for now. Thank you.
Okay. I'll run through a couple of the things that I've got. So obviously you said that the rear of the premises, so Imperial Lane, was out of use for customer access and egress except for emergency evacuation. Would that be something that you would be willing to accept as a condition? I think that's what you've said, so it would seem, yep.
I'm sorry, it is.
There was also some the comments at the bottom of the noise report in the conclusions, and again I think there are some things in there that if were conditioned might be if you were amenable to accepting those as conditions, might go some way to reassuring the objectors. I will try and find it on my system and switch pages, but you've got the conclusions on, where are we? And again, it might be if those were offered as conditions of having that noise limiter exercise carried out as a condition, etc. That might again go quite a way to.
Yes. There are two bullet points that sort of jump out as potential foundations for conditions. Bullet point 2, which is the maximum number of 8 patrons after 2200 hours, and then the noise limiting exercise. We have taken the liberty of drafting potential conditions reflecting both of those aspects of the report, and if you'd like I can either provide a copy to your officer when you retire or read them out now, but we rather anticipated that that might be a point that you might make.
I think it would probably be worth reading them out now, and that would give the objectors the opportunity
Absolutely.
to hear them as well.
They're pretty standard sort of conditions. I might have built them up something I can't quite cope with now. Anyway, that a sound limiting device or similar equipment should be installed at the premises, be maintained in full working order, and be at use at all times that the premises are in operation under this licence. All amplification equipment, entertainment devices and amplified instruments shall be routed through the sound limiting device or similar equipment. The sound limiting device or similar equipment should be calibrated so that the level of amplified sound at the premises does not cause a statutory or public nuisance. Only management staff shall have access to the sound limiting device or similar equipment and shall be able to demonstrate that it is in use at the immediate request of council and or police officers. And I can, as I say, provide a copy, of course. And then secondly, that there shall be no more than 8 people at any one time in the outside terrace area to the front of the premises after 10 p.m. Monday to Sunday. And those seem to us to reflect those 2 bullet points in Mr. Anderson's conclusions.
Brilliant, thank you. So let's go through some other questions. There was obviously the race week membership, which required, it basically said pre-booking. Now, as a licensing committee, we obviously deal with the pre-booking of private hire vehicles versus you can hail a taxi. And I think one of the objectors expressed a concern that effectively you could pre-book on an app, on a QR code outside the premises and be deemed to pre-book. I wondered if you could cover how you might address that concern.
The only way that you can attend is if you pre-book through an existing member or an existing committee member. So there is no app to, unless you are connected with the club and are known by the club, you won't be able to book online, so to speak, just to attend.
The point I was just exploring with Mr. Ferian, and this is my fault for not exploring with him before the hearing, is the sort of the standard rubric for membership of clubs, which requires a minimum of a 2-day period between application and membership status being granted. And that, given what you've heard about the membership process, is obviously a condition that we could comply with. So again, if that's a piece of comfort that the committee would like to see built into the membership conditions, then we're perfectly content with that as well. And that should alleviate the concern. There's not an app, there's not intended to be an app, but that might.
I think that if that was conditioned about the 2 days, especially during race week, that would probably help alleviate some of the concerns. When I did the site visit to the premises, obviously the waste and refuse is stored outside the back, and there's a noise sensitive premises now. I'm not sure whether the objectors mentioned it, but it is quite a common issue that we're aware of, which is the noise of glass being emptied outside certain hours. And again, I just wondered whether you had any thoughts on that as an issue. And again, it might be worth suggesting sort of the hours between which that would occur and limiting that. Again, it would seem a sensible. I'm not sure that was on there. I may have missed it, but
Sorry, you can see what is intended under the heading Deliveries and Refuge, first bullet point, proposed timing limited to between 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. daily. It's a matter for you, sir, as to whether you felt it necessary to put that as a condition where you see it there as part of the operational management plan already.
I've managed to pick that up. Yeah, so I think given the concerns we've got and obviously the noise sensitive, it's one of those things where you've said that the OMP, the Operational Management Plan, was a living document, and I think it might be useful to look at what we would wish to condition from that to, again, protect the residents from the potential noise nuisance.
It's obviously best practice, so and anything that's best practice is not an issue for this applicant.
Bear with me, I'm just going to check my notes. Capacity. Right, so we've covered the membership policy, pre-booking policy. I think the only other thing was about the security now. Security, especially during race week and what have you. Now, where am I going to find that? I think there was a condition on there about the. There are two, and are you content that, based on the membership, that is sufficient during race week? It does get quite lively in town, and it might not just be your customers, it might be other people as well, given you've got an outside area.
Yes, I mean, the normal status quo, as you know, through proposed condition 11 at page 28, is that the numbers shall be on a risk-assessed basis. Our recognition of the potential impact of particularly the horse racing festivals is reflected in the proposal that then there will have to be a minimum of 2 SIA door staff after 2100 hours. So we have sought to strike that balance already. There's nothing to stop a risk assessment producing a higher number or a longer duration of SIA deployment. But having been to the premises, sir, and just to remind your colleagues that it is a single access point which needs to be sort of staffed and controlled. We think that's a reasonable starting point, but it is expressed as a minimum, and we can only go upwards from there.
Thank you. What I would try and do now is ask, if I go back to the objectors, and just if there's anything you want to add, bearing in mind that sorry, I will first take some questions from the licensing officer.
Thank you. It was just a couple of questions and a couple of clarifications, really. In terms of the terminology has been used in terms of when the SIA would be set at the minimum of 2 persons. It's talking about Cheltenham race festivals. Are we talking about the showcase, the November meeting, and I don't need to baffle the barrister at all, because I'm still getting to grips with this, but the showcase is the October meeting, which is a little bit bigger. The November meeting is the November meeting, which is probably the second most popular, I'm assuming, and then obviously you've got the March Festival. There are 16 different race meetings at Cheltenham Racecourse, and I just wanted to be clear each year. I just wanted to be clear specifically what you meant there, whether you just mean the March meeting, whether you mean those top 3, or whether you mean the whole lot.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because obviously the March meeting is completely different to the rest of them. So it does refer to the March meeting, where the others we won't be doing anything specific for those events. They're very small and very niche, and ultimately we'll use our discretion if, for example, we have a committee member that would like to do something at that time, we can then set out however many SIAs would be appropriate. But again, we won't be dealing with members of the public at that point.
Second question was, obviously you want to set the limit on the number of people that could be outside at any time as no more than 8 after 10 o'clock. Can you just let us know, obviously when you've got SIA on duty, that will be quite a simple process. Which staff or how will you manage that just to keep that limit in normal operational hours? So an average Friday night or a Friday night during one of the other meetings, what would you be doing to police that?
Yes, so we've got front of house team. Front of house team will make sure that that area is supervised.
Constantly.
Constantly, yes.
Just one thing, there was a couple of things in the noise assessment that I was just going to ask a little bit more clarification. You've talked about the idea of taxi pickups, and obviously with our other hat in terms of licensing, we deal with taxis quite a lot. It's not to the same extent as in some cities, but obviously a lot of customers, particularly customers that are going to spend a little bit more money, may want a better quality private hire vehicle and may rely more on a private hire service, particularly at peak times, than going and standing on, in a queue potentially for a taxi. It's just the noise assessment was based upon the idea that after 8 o'clock, customers will kind of all be directed to the promenade, and it really is just kind of flagging, just asking if you had any more thoughts on the fact that there is the likelihood that people will try and book private hire vehicles. Once they've booked them, they've arranged for that vehicle to pick them up. There's not a great deal that you can do about that if they've booked it on an app. It's just worth bearing that in mind, really.
Should we take that as an informed?
Yeah, and obviously the other thing is in terms of after 8 p.m, particularly with single females and women's safety, the taxi rank is not that far away. Someone shouldn't be at risk walking to the taxi rank, but particularly if they've had a few drinks. If they don't feel too good, then you'd obviously want a customer getting directly into a vehicle as quickly and as easily as possible.
Absolutely, or other venues of this calibre that I've represented will have a system and adopt a system of walking any such person directly to a taxi rank, and I suspect that would be the case here. There's a substantial holding area inside the venue, so people can be kept very safely inside. Nobody needs to be waiting unsafely outside. And if they are going to use that, the promenade taxi rank, then they can be taken there if there's any concern about vulnerability at all.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, if I go round the objectors, you've obviously heard what's been said. So if you wish to add any further short comments, I'll take Heidi first.
I would just say that with respect first to the proposed condition that there be noise limiters, the language that was proposed was a bit ambiguous in that it was going to be set at a level that doesn't prevent a public nuisance. I think it would be in everybody's interest if it can be agreed in advance what that level will be, and I would suggest that there should be set so that there is no noise heard outside the venue, especially during some evening hours. So I don't think that the language that doesn't create a nuisance really solves our concerns if the panel's inclined to do that. And again, I would personally, now that we're dealing with very specific acoustic issues, I would have liked to have been able to consult somebody to know what that number is or what's done in this area, and I don't feel like we've been given the opportunity to do that.
Okay. And do we, if Mr. Fell, just let me check that now people are ready to make sure you don't appear on the screen. I think that will be something for the applicant to answer. There's a definition of a statutory nuisance, but I think, yeah, we'll come back to officers for that one. So if I come back to you, because yeah.
Happily for me, Mr. Anderson's already volunteered to answer both those points. I'm going to turn straight to him for the.
So, yeah, sorry, so the noise limiter setting is, the word, you're right, the wording is not clear to a non-practitioner. So we would run the system in the venue and gradually decrease it so that we're not picking it up in your property or your property. So we would need to work collaboratively with yourselves and officers from the local authority so that it isn't heard inside each of the flats. And that's under windows open or windows closed of your properties. Our windows will be closed, but we will assess that with your windows open and your windows closed, just to make sure that in both scenarios you're protected.
Technical expert at all on noise, but obviously the noise side of things is very technical, and you know the criteria and the things that are considered by a professional like this gentleman and by an environmental health officer are basically written in the same textbook. So they, you know, it's something that's quite a specific process.
Okay, any more questions from members? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move to the member debate, so that you at least hear some of what we've got to say in public. We may well go to adjourn to formulate the decision. But before I open it to debate, I'll remind you it's important that you give due regard to the Council's licensing policy. If you deviate from the policy, you give clear reasons for doing so. And it's important that you only take into account material licensing considerations and your decisions are reasonable, proportionate and rational. Okay, I don't know if you want to, either you want to start or you want me to start?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right time to make this consideration or maybe it's just an idea for the applicant. Coming back to the membership idea, in the Licensing Act 2003, there's no mandatory requirement for guests to be signed in, but I think it might help alleviate the concerns of the objectors that if you did have a process where guests were signed in and members were signed into, and I think that will help throughout the whole year, including the festivals, whether that be, you know, the horse racing or whether it be science or literature or whatever. You could even go as far as to say you could have some kind of form of ID to prove that you're a member too, and that might have a picture on it. You already asked for pictures on your website, and that might actually help with your exclusivity anyway. You never know, it might be quite cool to have something like a card for good times. But I think two considerations like that might actually help alleviate the concerns of the numbers of the people and knowing who's inside the venue at any given time, which is something that you're sort of putting forward anyway. So those are the only sort of comments I would make at the moment. Thanks.
Just to come back, if you look at, now which page is it? Page 27 on item 5, there is the list of the names and addresses of members shall be kept on the premises at all times, together with a book showing the names and dates of attendance of any guests introduced by members. Both the list and the book shall be produced on demand for inspection by the police or an authorised officer of the council. So there's, I don't know whether that comes close to what you were.
Well, yeah, exactly. That if you had that book, we had that list, and there was a sort of like a front door where people were going through. You've already said there's only one place to get in, and it could be as simple as giving your name, and then you type the name. The name's there. There'll be a picture too, because I know on your website you ask for a picture as well, so you'll know exactly who they are. But I'm thinking more of before 10 p.m. outside. Obviously, after 10 p.m. there's only 8 people sat outside. But let's say it's race week and it's before 10. There could be loads of people outside potentially, and whether or not knowing who's a member and who's a guest is going to be tricky if you don't know who's there. As we've already said, in the Licensing Act of 2003, you don't actually have to sign people in. There's no obligation to do so. So you could end up having people stood outside and going in and ordering drinks and whatever. And although you've said that could only really realistically seat 22 to 30 people, as Councillor Williams said, in town and race week gets quite lively, so there could be more than that of people standing there. So coming back to my suggestion of potentially having a card, if you use that to order drinks, might actually help as well, alleviate that concern, which I'm sure if I lived nearby, I might have. I wouldn't have a concern with the venue in normal hours and normal days, but I think it'd certainly be during something like a race week where you would have a lot of people in town and people using the outside area before 10 p.m. So building on what Councillor Willingham said about having a list and building on what we spoke about earlier about membership, I think the comments I've made might help alleviate those concerns.
I may support the view of my colleague. The other thing occurs to me, with regard to members, I assume we have a rule for excluding a member or expelling them if something happened that you felt was not appropriate or was damaging the reputation of the club.
So, from my point of view of looking at this, so I've obviously had the benefit of going around the premises. The premises does come across, it's very well fitted out. I think there are some drawings in the licensing bundle. I very much understand the concerns of the residents in Imperial Lane. It is very close, and I think the conditions about the only access and egress being in emergencies where people would need to evacuate the building, so not a default entrance goes a good way to mitigating those concerns. Having looked at some of the objections, there are a number of things that are planning policy that's referenced, and obviously planning and licensing are very different beasts. So as an example, you can get planning permission and have your license refused. You can get your license and have planning permission refused, and you need both to operate. We've got to stick to the licensing and not consider those types of planning matters. So to the rear of the premises, I think conditions about conditioning the waste and recycling, because emptying glass after is incredibly noisy. That would be one noise sensitive thing. And I think if we look at the conditions as well as what's been accepted, that is likely to cover that. And again, the noise setting is going to be covered by what is a statutory nuisance, so the public prevention of nuisance, and I think getting environmental health to set that, since they would be to work with the applicant to set that, is likely to mitigate that to the point which the law says is acceptable. And the things that would need to be taken into account would be that it is a town centre location. I think the other premises that have been mentioned by the objectors, obviously we have to take this on its own individual merits. And having been inside the other premises that were mentioned, this is a very different type of premises. The sort of speakers that are in the nightclubs that were mentioned are very loud, very much. It's a very large venue with a lot of loud music. This is on visual inspection, this is a very different type of application, and it sounds to me like the applicant has every intention of running it to not cause a public nuisance and to not irritate the neighbours. And I think we can condition that, that we can add the conditions that have already been mentioned to try and give some more reassurance without impinging on the applicant's proposed business model. And I think from what I've heard, the applicant obviously has accepted those conditions as sort of as a reasonable thing to have. So in that sense, I think we can go and we will probably adjourn and go and work through that. I also want to give the objectors the reassurance that if our decision is to grant with those extra conditions, and there are then issues that are directly attributable to the premises, then environmental health, or the police, and any of the other responsible authorities that are listed do have that option to get involved. So in terms of statutory noise nuisance, environmental health have those powers, and they also have a power to call a review, and the residents have that power to call a review based on evidence. I think that the challenge with evidence at the moment is the premises hasn't been operating under this model, so there isn't any evidence that it will cause the issues that are of concern. And I think the acoustic report, while it is late, which is regrettable, we obviously have heard from the person who has written that, and obviously their professional reputation is based on providing reports to both objectors and applicants on a sound professional engineering basis, but also that if your report is going to lead to the person who's paid you for it getting into trouble with environmental health, then again I can see that there would be that professional standard, that compliance with professional standards to make someone provide a report that is going to be meaningful for us to look at. And again, it is unfortunate that it was a later addition to the bundle. We will probably, my suggestion is that we will retire to form our, to come back with our decision and our reasons. But before I do that, I just want to check whether the licensing officer is happy with what you've heard from my public discussion of that, and also what other members have said, and then I'll look to the legal officer and then come back to the applicant for a final right of reply.
Yeah, I just obviously we've got to ensure that in the decision notice and in the decision itself that we go through and we give reasons for whatever the decision might be, and where the statutory guidance or the policy is relevant, that we are making clear reference to that in a methodical and comprehensive way, so that all parties can understand the decision and the reasonings behind it. Thank you.
In fact, before I come to my legal officer, I will just say a few other things, which, if you bear with me while I check on a map. So some of the issues, as well as the planning issues, which we can't consider, I think some of the issues may well be civil matters between the parties for the land that is not highway land. And based on council mapping, I think the frontage is on private land, so some of those issues will probably be a civil matter that, again, are not really material to licensing. Just to put that on as my understanding. Jason?
Yeah, it's just obviously there isn't the members will have read the whole bundle and would have read all the representations, but as an example, and it's not been something that's necessarily been discussed, but one of the representations refers to public safety in terms of the use of that outdoor area, and it's just ensuring that as far as possible members have gone through and considered, and obviously they've got a very good understanding now of the proposal of the applicant, but it's just making sure that that nothing is missed really in terms of going through that decision. Thank you.
And Vicky, do you have any comments? No? So I now turn to the applicant. Your final right to reply before we will adjourn.
Well, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity, but really anything I say now would be repeating myself. We've been given such ample opportunity to speak and to answer questions. It really is hoped, if we're lucky enough to have the premises licence granted, that this will be a good venue, a good neighbour, which will develop itself symbiotically as between itself, its community and its membership base. That's our hope and aspiration for what on any view is a very, very beautiful premises.
Thank you very much. Right, just looking at the time, it's 7:45, so I propose that we will adjourn and take some advice to come up with a decision making. If I suggest 15 minutes, is that likely to be acceptable? Okay, so we're just going to adjourn. We will, given there's more of you in the room than us, we will move. So we streaming? Yep. Okay. So thank you for your patience. So the committee has decided unanimously to grant the application with mandatory conditions, those offered in the application, and to attach specific conditions to promote the licensing objectives where it considers appropriate. I'll go through orally the reasons. There will be a written set of reasons that will follow that. Sorry, I'm just going to grab some water. Right. So Imperial Lane is narrow and close, and this is an old property. It's in the core town centre area, and due to its location, there is some expectation of noise in the vicinity. We note that none of the responsible authorities have sustained their objection. We have got to, as a committee, disregard a good amount of the planning stuff. It's not relevant, or it's information that we couldn't take into consideration. We can't take into account the other licensed premises in the area, as we have to determine each case on its own individual merits. The application complies with the hours in the policy, and it's actually shorter than those for the policy in a town centre location. We're not in a position to refuse, as the applicant has acted reasonably. There's no evidence to substantiate the objections, and there's nothing linked back to the temporary event notices to raise any doubt of that we are aware of as a committee. The safety issues in relation to the outside area, we've concluded it's not a highly trafficked area. It's private land, and any of the other issues are civil matters. We recognise there could be issues, but we don't think that we can condition it. We believe that the applicant's condition on noise, which I'm not going to read out because it is quite long, is likely to mitigate a lot of the concerns of the objectors. And we would suggest that in terms of the civil matters, we can't get involved in those, and objectors would need to seek their own independent legal advice. And in terms of planning issues, they would either need to contact planning enforcement and or their local councillors. And in terms of environmental health, again, there is the council has environmental health, who are another port of contact. In terms of the additional conditions, so we've got those that were offered additionally, which is no customer shall enter or leave the premises via Imperial Lane except in an emergency. The condition relating to the noise limiting device, the condition restricting the outside terrace to no more than 8 people after 2200. In terms of the membership and the pre-booking for race week, there shall be no less than 48 hours between application and membership or admission being granted. Deliveries, refuse and all recycling will be between the hours of 0800 and 1930 hours, which is from the operational management plan. No glass recycling shall occur outside the premises between 2300 and 0700, and the reason for that is that it is incredibly noisy and is likely to cause noise nuisance if it happens outside those hours. And then as an advisory, and we can't condition this, we would suggest that the applicant provides a landline phone number to local residents that's available 24 hours a day or whilst the premises is open, and also potentially invite them in to see the premises in the interests of public relations. Obviously, we can't condition that. And that is the end of those. So there is a right of appeal to the Magistrates' Court within 21 days for all parties. I think that's the decision, and it will be sent in writing within 5 days.
Will I get that on email?
Yes. Yeah.
You've got that long condition.
Right, and I will just hand back to back to the legal officer. Right. So there we go. That's the conclusion of that. I think we will just take a pause for another adjournment for 5 minutes to allow everybody to change seats and for the this item to be finished, and then we'll come back at, trying to work out, shall we say 25 past? There we go. Right, okay. So to anyone watching on the webcast, welcome back. We're now going to move on to the next agenda item, which is a licensing application for 33 Prestbury Road. So the same spiel as before. So because this is a regulatory item, members must be present and have heard the proceedings in their entirety to vote on this item. We will ensure that the applicant and their representative, if they have one, are present in the meeting. I will ask the licensing officer to introduce the report. Members will get an opportunity to ask the licensing officer questions, and the applicant or their representative will get an opportunity to ask the licensing officer questions. There are no objectors here for this hearing, so we will then move on to hear from the applicant, who will be given an opportunity to present their application and make their case. We ask applicants to limit this to no more than 10 minutes, but in the interest of making sure you get a fair hearing, if that isn't possible, we will look at how to deal with that. Members can ask the applicant questions. Members will debate the matter. I will check with the legal officer and the licensing officer that they're happy with what we have said. The applicant will be given a final right of reply, and it's likely that we will then adjourn in the same way to formulate our reasons. So with that, if I can ask our licensing officer to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Normally, we would provide a summary of the report to a degree to cover most points so that all parties are fully aware of the item in case they've not read all of the papers. It's worth stressing that all of the persons in the room sat through the previous application that we had, so they have heard all of the standard elements of a report. All of the members have, all of the legal advisor and everyone else who's present in here has heard that. There are no objectors, and so I will be very, very brief in terms of just providing the salient points from this report. This is an application for a premises licence for the address as per the report. When considering this application, the licensing authority must consider the licensing objectives, and those licensing objectives are detailed in the report. The responsible authorities are effectively the statutory consultees for an application, including the fire brigade and the police and environmental health. We have other persons that have the ability to make objections or make comments against an application or even for an application. They used to be called interested parties, but that is basically any resident or business that believes they're affected by the application. In our policy, we have core hours as set down in our policy. This is there to guide members. It is not hard and fast, but it is there certainly to provide some guidance in terms of what the council thinks is possible within the constraints of the circumstances of each individual application. We've also got some guidance in our policy in terms of some of the issues that should be considered where we do get relevant representations. In this case, we have had 7 relevant representations from other persons, and we've also had a number of support comments from interested parties as well. We've had 6 relevant representations. One of those was late, so that is not a relevant representation. And we've had 4 supporting comments. Those are attached to appendices C and D of the report. The application itself is attached to Appendix A, and the council is hearing this application in an administrative process, in legal terms, and the options for the committee this evening are to grant the application with mandatory conditions and those offered within the application only, or grant the application with mandatory conditions, those conditions offered in the application, and attach specific conditions if it sees fit, or it may refuse the application. There is some detail about conditioning in the report, and all parties have a right of appeal of 20. They must, within being notified of the decision, they must make their appeal within 21 days if they feel aggrieved. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do any of my council colleagues have questions? So I will just get you to answer this one, to put it on record, because some of the objectors have mentioned planning policy, et cetera, So I think we just need to make a comment about planning policy is completely separate and what have you.
Yeah, it's just to be clear that the planning regime and the licensing regime are separate regimes, and they are bound by different grounds that can be considered, and they consider different factors. And the council has to be, or the subcommittee has to be very cautious in considering issues that are raised that may be relevant to planning, because if we were to consider something that was a planning specific issue, then we could be acting beyond our powers and we could be open to appeal. So the council does have to ensure that it limits itself to those factors that can be considered relevant under the Licensing Act.
Thank you. Just to check, do you have any questions for the officer based on what you've heard on the report? Okay. So what we'll now do is, this is your opportunity to speak. So what we're hoping to hear from you is that obviously you've seen the objections, and it's your opportunity to respond to those, and also to just explain to the committee what you intend to do and how you intend to run the premises, etc. So, as I say, I'll hand over to you, and it's Lena, is that right? It's going to be Paul. Okay, so there we go. That's right. So we'll hand over to Paul. There we go. So.
We will be proactive in adopting a zero-tolerance approach to antisocial behaviour. For example, asking customers to leave if they are causing a disturbance. We've got really good CCTV in use that records sound and vision after a conversation with the police. Staff will be trained to treat the area directly outside the venue as their responsibility equally as inside. With regard to music, we want people to be able to talk to each other and not have to shout to be heard. Therefore, music will be at a controlled level via the Sonos app. We've fitted some acoustic panelling underneath the bar to try and help deaden the sound. There will be clear signage reminding customers to leave respectfully and quietly at the end of the night, and to respect the local residents. Staff will also be looking out for this and asking people to move along if need be. Staff will also verbally be reminding people to leave quietly as things are starting to wind down. It's definitely not meant to be, or was never planned to be, a pub or a club environment, more of a cocktail bar. There's going to be no encouragement for binge drinking, possibly occasional board game nights, quiz nights on the quieter weekday evenings, so more of a social. We fully respect the noise that bottles can make being emptied into the recycle bins. Therefore, this will be done during office hours only, and so they'll be stored inside the property until the following day, when they'll be put into the main bins. Smoking area, to encourage people not to stay outside for longer than necessary. We will be not allowing them to take drinks outside, and hopefully limiting the amount of people that will be out there. Door staff will be supplied when the need arises, for example, race week, because we understand it's on a main thoroughfare from the racecourse to town. Solution to parking worries. We've thought about having a parking scheme to encourage customers to park in Portland Street car park or other neighbouring car parks, with an incentive of a slight discount off their first drink if they can show us proof that they're parking sensibly. Yeah, because a few of the complaints were about parking. There's no other run bar that we know of in Cheltenham, and we want to create a unique experience that we feel will enhance the area. A lot of people that I speak to They don't enjoy drinking in town so much, so the thought of having somewhere to go just outside of town is quite appealing. It's only a small venue, so it's not a very large capacity. We also own a successful business on the same road opposite where the Rum Bar will be, and so we've had that for 10 years, and we're perfectly respectful of local residents and the surrounding area there. We do know that Prestbury Road is a main thoroughfare from town and out of town, and it does get quite noisy with traffic, so we appreciate that. The staff that we've spoken to are all from busy bar backgrounds that they've used to work in town. We'll adopt the Challenge 25 scheme, and we'll keep a refusal log. If we do have live music, it will be contained to the basement area, not on the street level, therefore keeping the sound contained. There was another point made on one of the complaints about the noise during the fitting out of the bar, but that was kind of out of my control really, because it was builders' radios and they left the doors wide open. We won't be putting any external signage up in respect of the conservation area. And I'm more than happy to stay connected, exchange numbers, etc., and listen to any concerns from the objectors. As I own a business on the same road, they can always come in and contact me. Anything else you think?
Did you want to just say like what it's looking to be, like just a brief outline?
Yeah, like it's our vision was just to have a professional chilled bar that people can go into and just sit and chat and enjoy the rums of the world, I guess.
Just enjoy each other's company.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's the plan. Anything else? I think that's it. Thank you.
If you want. Sorry. Right. So what we'll now move to is members asking you questions if they have any. So have you got any questions? None. Okay. So I've got a couple, or at least one. Let's go through it. So I'm just looking at the requested hours and the requested opening times. So we've got the Cheltenham, on days of Cheltenham races. So there are the request is where, I'll read it out, and it's on page 266 at the bottom, 267, but it's repeated through the application form. So we've got, where not otherwise permitted, the term allow for permitted licensable activities shall commence from 10 a.m. on days of Cheltenham races. I guess we need to clarify which race meets that applies to. And then there is the, when not otherwise permitted, the terminal hour for licensable activities shall be extended until midnight 30 on Cheltenham race days, so again the same clarification, and Christmas Eve. And then we've got, in all cases where non-standard timings apply, there's a 30-minute drinking up time shall be preserved. What I am just trying to check is the supply of alcohol condition is until midnight 30, and the extended opening hours is to midnight 30, which doesn't really give anyone the 30 minutes drinking up time. So I'm just trying to clarify whether it's going to be, the premises will be open until midnight 30, which would suggest that the licensable activity might finish at midnight, or whether there just won't be the 30 minutes drinking up time, or whether it would need to be open until 1, and I'm not sure that because that's longer than's been advertised, it's allowed. So it's just trying to clarify. So that it's what you mean by the race days. So if we start with that one, whilst the officer checks the timings.
So it would just be really the main 3, the March, October, and I think January.
No, I think November, isn't it?
Is it November? I'm not too sure the exact dates, but
Yeah,
main
just
3.
yeah.
Right, it's the main 3. So it's March, and I'm trying to remember which ones it is. March, November. Yeah.
I think given that the application has said on days of Cheltenham races, it would be quite reasonable. By the sounds of it, your intention is just to go for the 3 biggest meetings, but it would be quite reasonable any decision should reflect October, which I think is the showcase, November, which is the one I wrote down earlier, and January can be considered, and March, and I think that way it covers without forcing you to decide which one of those ones it has to be this evening.
And you might need to give us some advice on the hours. So it is 267, 266 at the bottom, which is the premises opening hours,
Yeah,
and then sale of alcohol is on 265.
yeah. So in terms of the hours that have been applied for, the go to live music and recording music, obviously it's been asked for from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 11:30 each evening, apart from Sundays. If we look at the supply of alcohol has been asked for 4 o'clock until 2300 each day. So, and the opening hours are 1600 till 2330. So drinking up time has been implemented in the application, because the key thing is when does the alcohol stop? The second key thing is then when does the door shut, and when has everyone got to be out of the premises? The licensable activity has been asked for to be able to go on until the premises closes. I'm sure that probably wouldn't be the case that you'd have the disco, would be a disco necessarily, but you wouldn't have the volume on at full blast until 11:30. You'd wind things down as you close the bar, you drop the music, and in that case you wouldn't necessarily need it on the licence, but because it could be classed as incidental. But the fact it's on there is probably helpful for everyone. And in terms of the non-standard timings, where not otherwise permitted, the terminal hour shall commence from 10 o'clock. Where not otherwise permitted, the terminal hour for licensable activities shall cease and shall be extended until 00:30. So the only thing that you could, but it is covered because where it mentions the point, for example, under page 267D, where not otherwise permitted, the terminal hour for permitted licensable activities shall be extended until 00:30 on days of Cheltenham races and Christmas Eve. What you've then still got below is that at the bottom of that paragraph, it does clearly say, in all cases where non-standard timings apply, the 30-minute drinking up time shall be preserved. So the opening hours on those occasions would be 0100 hours.
I just wanted to check that it was effectively it was licensed until 0100. So that's to just make it clear, because obviously it's the same wording in different places, and just to clarify that. So I've scrolled through. I think that's probably all the questions I've got. Okay. Oh, did you have something to add? Sorry. Sorry, look down. Before I move this to the debate, I'll remind members that it's important to give due regard to the Council's licensing policy. If you deviate from the policy, that you give clear reasons for doing so. It's important that you only take into account material licensing considerations and that your decisions are reasonable, proportional and rational. So, who wants to start? Councillor Harman.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of things. First of all, it seems to me the applicant has got another business in the area, so I'm sure he's known to the local residents. I'm sure that you've been there a while. I don't know how long you've been there, but so they know you. So it's not as if you're an unknown quantity opening a new business. Secondly, I do wonder whether the best one of the objectors may have slightly misunderstood what the objective is, and they might think it's a rather grander event than it really is going to be. So beyond that, I have no questions and no more comments. Thank you.
Ed, do you want me to? Shall I go? I'll trundle through that. So there's obviously some objections on grounds of noise. But I think, and they've mentioned another premises. Obviously, we have to take this application on its own individual merits. And if you read, so going through them, there is a fear that it will cause. There isn't any evidence. So I think that is a key point. I am not really convinced that parking is actually a material licensing consideration that we need to give due regard to. Again, the other issues that are mentioned are so that there's noise is a concern, but I think from my site visit that it's the downstairs which is far more noise insulated that will be used. I guess there's a question which you will need to think about for not just races but also football match days, and making sure that the premises is you'll get to come back, it's fine, honestly, it's all right. I'm just going through what we've got. There is one representation that has unfortunately quoted a vast number of planning policy documents, and ultimately we can't take those into account because this requires licensing policy to be considered, and therefore those are a matter for the planning committee, or if it's not gone to planning committee, for planning enforcement. So we can't actually really look at that. You've obviously got, there's the points about not taking drinks outside, trying to limit the number of people, and door staff during race week, which I suspect will likely to be added as conditions on the grounds that those are likely to mitigate the concerns raised, so public nuisance from the noise and from people. We're likely to condition the times of the bottles being emptied. Again, that's a very loud activity. And there's one objection which seems to completely have missed the point and is discussing parking outside a non-licensed premises, and I unfortunately that seems to completely miss the point, so we can't really take that into account at all. In terms of applications in support, they're not hugely linked to the licensing objectives, so I support it. Just saying I support it is doesn't really meet the threshold, but there are comments that suggest. So I'll pick one out, and it just says the bar will not be some overcrowded space causing local disturbances, which I think is someone expressing an opinion that they think the licensing objectives will be met. And it also shows that this is an application that's attracted both concern and support. In terms of the hours applied for, it's a local area, so 10 a.m. Until midnight is the standard policy conditions, and those would only be met, those would occur during race week. At the rest of the time, the hours are well within those policy. New Year's Eve is a common extension, so is Christmas. The races would be slightly outside of that, but I think given where it is, and given how many people are there coming through there for the races, that probably is unlikely to have any significant impact beyond what's already happening outside because of the large crowds that are going past. And we've clarified the terminal hours and how that works with the during race week. So I think that's my reasoning behind that. You don't need to comment, so yep. So are you happy that
Have you got that on the Word document, sorry, or have you just reeled those off?
I've just typed it all down.
I've reeled most of that off.
I'm sure if you could.
So if you're happy with that, that's captured and given us some salient reasons and tried to address the concerns of the objectors. I think the guidance which might need to be said to the objectors is that they would need to either speak to their ward councillor or speak to planning enforcement with their concerns, and the same one if the licence is granted and there are noise issues, that's a matter that can be referred to environmental health. They also have the option to review it themselves. And there were no representations from any of the responsible authorities suggesting that the police aren't concerned about crime and disorder and environmental health and not concerned about the noise, which I think are the main objections. And highways haven't raised anything about parking, but I don't think that's. I'm not sure that they're an RA, and it's not really material in this sense. So you're content? Check with my legal officer. Yep. So before we adjourn, to just make sure we formulated our reasons, you get your final right of reply.
Just that having lived with the football for 10 years, we don't want to encourage them in any way. So that's a definite no. That was it, really.
Okay, right. We just need to adjourn for a moment. Shall we go out? We may as well. I think that's probably... Are we good to go? Right, welcome back. So the unanimous decision of the committee is to grant the licence with the mandatory conditions, plus additional conditions as put forward by the applicant, and with the addition of some conditions that we feel are necessary. You've heard me read out the reasons, and those have been captured. But the additional conditions are no drinks outside, or no glasses outside, no drinks outside. That there should be door staff, as in SIA door staff, during race week. And there's an additional condition that the recycling of glass bottles will only take place between the hours of 08:30 and 17:30, which is what we've interpreted as the working hours. There's a right of appeal to the magistrates within 21 days if you're aggrieved at the conditions or that, and also for the objectors if they are aggrieved, and the officers will send the decision notice in writing. So that has been granted, and we are now on agenda item 5, which is any other item the chairman determines to be urgent and which requires a decision, and you'll be glad to know there are none, so I declare the meeting